This time-lapse is for the next dragon in my seasonal dragon mini-series. Once again, I have created my own design for this dragon 100%, and if you're interested in seeing my own concept art that I created for this or reference photo, you can check that out on my other channel where I do a time-lapse of the art piece that I used as a reference for this. Aside from that, this build starts like all of my builds do, with a giant clump of blocks that I'm trying to mold into a distinguishable shape. I do believe this is the largest organic that I have ever made. It's not the tallest build, I think it's just large in terms of mass. He's a very bulky dragon, and naturally, because he is so large, he did take quite a while to smooth over and to shape. I focused on one section at a time, getting one part completely smoothed and shaped before moving on to the next. With the head mostly shaped how I wanted it, it gives me a good basis for the scale of the rest of the dragon, because that's kind of hard to figure out all at once, especially when you haven't fine-tuned it and gotten all the details in. Getting some details in early helps me figure out the scale of the rest of the build. I've already smoothed the face at this point, but that was the easy part. Looking at this massive build, it's going to take me a long time to get the rest of it all smooth and shaped properly. Given the nature of Minecraft building, I'm gonna have to do the whole thing by hand. I don't know how long I spent smoothing it, but I just worked on one little section at a time, getting it looking nice, and then moving on to the next. Here's what the smoothing process looks like in real time. I'm smoothing off all of the curves and making sure all the layers are evenly distributed. That's pretty much all there is to it. And yes, it is very time consuming, but as you can see for yourself, the results are totally worth it. It's just so satisfying. Commands are very helpful for getting the foundational shape. Sometimes they don't require too much extra work if it generates smoothly itself. But other things, like the details, it's just better to build those by hand. Now the wings are a bit small, I think, for the size of this dragon, but it doesn't matter, this is all fantasy anyway. Their main purpose of being here is to distinguish him as being a winged dragon. Now's the fun part where the dragon comes to life when color is added. Because this dragon has such a big surface area, I decided to only add some scales with the texturing and not covering the entire body like I did with the previous one. The texturing on the neck is fairly simple, done with brushes and using a blend brush to blend it all together. I did maybe touch it up by hand in some areas, but for the most part, I tried to keep it with just using brushes. Once I get the pattern down, I can take that pattern and repeat it throughout the entire dragon. I've got the larger scales that I brush on and then detail by hand that fade away into more empty areas that are just textured with brushes. That makes it easier in a sense because I'm just repeating the same thing, one section at a time. While the scales look very good as they are, simply painted on the dragon, I wanted to try to see if I could get even more detail out of them by adding a bit of depth in between each scale. By carving out little sections in between all of the larger scales, it creates a more three-dimensional or bumpy effect along the skin, so it doesn't look as flat. Here's a before and after of how that affects the overall look. Even though the difference is subtle, it does look more realistic. Finally, we finished with the main part of the dragon. Now we just have to do the wings. These are fairly simple and don't take nearly as long. I just used some basic brushes to get a quick texture on there. I wasn't sure what color to use, but I do think this brown texture does complement the green very well. My original painting of this dragon, I had him lying in a field surrounded by butterflies. Of course, I'm going to do the same here. The only issue is, it does kind of ruin the scale of the dragon. He looks a lot smaller than he's supposed to when next to a butterfly, but we're just going to use our imaginations and pretend either these are enormous butterflies that he's surrounded by, or he is just not as big as he may appear. Either way, I wanted the butterflies to surround him to show how gentle he is because he allows them to land all over his back, and he's just relaxing in the summer sun. All that's left to do now is to create a field of grass all around the dragon, but that's easier said than done. I was not expecting this to take as long as it did. I can't tell you how many hours I spent just building grass. I did use Loft to create all of the grass, and the reason for that, instead of doing something like a schematic brush, was for different reasons. First of all, I wanted to make sure the grass was all oriented in different ways so it wasn't a copy-paste job. Second, because this is a hill that the dragon is lying on, the angle of the grass when you copy-paste things, typically when you paste something, it's going to go straight up. And that would not look very realistic to have everything going straight up while the hill is curving down. So by doing it this way with Loft, all of the grass kind of angles with the terrain and looks more realistic. As I was working on it, I wasn't sure if it was going to be worth it, but in the end, I ended up liking it, so I guess that's all that matters. I also added a few yellow flowers. These were actually from a different build that I've done in the past. I usually don't reuse assets, but in this case, I really just wanted something quick to add on there, so I took that yellow flower from that previous build and pasted it a few times around. And that's it. This build is complete, with the gentle dragon lying in a field of flowers and butterflies. I did do a render at the end, although you can still see him pretty well in the cinematic portion. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time.